Okay.
Thank you,
Then
Kristen.
perhaps since you're more in tune with the topic of immigration, if you could just give us just a small idea, a small notion of what kind of problems mass immigration has caused in the U.S. in terms of ethnic tensions and crime. I don't know if you have any data about that, just so that we have some notion, because this
Yeah.
is a topic that is very, very, very rarely addressed in European media,
Hmm.
and you know, it would be great to get from someone in Washington in
Sure.
policy.
Yeah. So I assume we're talking about the 4 years of the Biden border crisis. And I think just to say
Or
that it
going back to
was,
Obama, if you have the numbers for those, because
yeah. But I would say like, and it was pretty dramatic under the Obama years as well. But President Biden and his administration was the first time we've ever seen a federal administration actively undermine border security in the U.S. And so it was the first administration that really, I think, enabled a lot of the chaos and the crime that we saw within our country, directly try to illegally funnel more and more people within to our country, inadmissible aliens that were not properly vetted, that were obviously bringing illicit narcotics into American communities, that were um, unfortunately murdering and causing other violence against American citizens. Um, so really, what we saw with under the Biden years, we saw obviously an explosion of illegal aliens coming through, not just the border itself, but through the ports of entry. But like I mentioned, the Biden administration actively gave them a pathway, which they called legal pathways, to let them come in. So that was like measures like the CBP1 app, even their parole systems that they set up, like CHNV. And so that was all designed to let in the most amount of illegal aliens that they could within their term. So we saw, if you count it all up, sort of within all the different categories of aliens apprehended by Border Patrol, those that came in through the ports of entry, those that came in through parole, the gotaways, which are the aliens that were not apprehended but just kind of snuck over the border without any law enforcement interaction. If you add that all up, and also the nationwide encounter, so even on the northern border, um, it was at least 12 million that came in under the Biden administration, which is just unprecedented. I believe it was only around 4 million under President Trump for all 4 years during his term. And obviously, the entire posture is completely different. It's what really makes it different, I think, with President Biden and Trump is that when aliens were getting into the U.S. under President Trump, now and during the first term, they weren't being released into the U.S. So that was Biden's policy of catch and release, which is kind of an umbrella term to say that when they were came into the country unlawfully, they weren't detained. So there's really no meaningful deterrent when you could just be released into American communities. Like I mentioned with the NGOs earlier, when you're being helped kind of every step of the way to get resettled here. But it's completely, what's completely, I think, just unacceptable is that a lot of these illegal aliens were claiming asylum when they really didn't qualify under U.S. law, and they're coached by the Mexican cartels um, to say what they need to get past the first line of a checkpoint, so to speak. But the real statutes for asylum are very strict. They specify that it has to be on basically political or 5 different kinds of persecution. So most of these illegal aliens were economic migrants that came in, so not lawful grounds to come into the U.S. But back to the kind of the negative effects we saw, like I mentioned, a lot of the illicit. I don't know if this is as much of a problem in Europe, maybe not the same exact drug, but the explosion of illicit fentanyl in American communities was one of the most devastating impacts. Over 100,000 deaths per year, mostly due to synthetic opioids, which fentanyl falls in that category. And we would, like, at least on in the think tank space, we would talk a lot to these families that lost their children, that knew almost everyone, it felt like, in an American community knew someone that had been a victim of fentanyl poisoning. And this has a whole kind of history of the drug manufacturing begins in China, and it's smuggled through the ports in Mexico, and then manufactured by the cartels, and then of course smuggled over the border. But then we also saw criminal aliens in American communities murdering people like Lincoln Riley, and then criminals tied to terrorists and other dangerous gangs, especially one that kind of popped up the past 4 years in particular under Biden was the Tren de Aragua, which is directly a tool basically of the Venezuelan Maduro regime. It's part of their military and law enforcement apparatus. So we saw a huge spike in members of the TDA within American communities. And President Trump has taken really unprecedented action to use the Alien Enemies Act to deport at least 200 of those TDA members, mostly Venezuelan men, to El Salvador, and to crack down on the worst criminal aliens that came into our country. And I think that was really what I saw from last fall when the election was overwhelmingly a mandate for America First, was that the American people were really, really sick of the crime and the just overrun communities that they were living in. And I think even if you didn't see it directly in your neighborhood, you could definitely sympathize with the family across the country that has had their child taken away from them by someone who never should have been in this country in the first place. It's just complete failure of our government to the people. So I would say that's kind of the top line. Negative effects. Could probably talk about that for hours, but
Absolutely. So, I mean, the Trump administration is what, 6 months in office now?
Mm-hmm.
I assume there are still no studies yet on what if we were to quantify the data, let's say on how much crime escalated, the exhaustion of public infrastructure. I mean, all of that being accounted. Is there anyone working on it? Do you have any idea of when we will be able to get those numbers? How much crime spiked? How much? I mean, even beyond just the immigration crime, just actual violent crime, and or even public health consequences, such as the increase in infectious diseases. I mean, do we have any notion of when we will have that data?
Most of the categories you just mentioned are more, I believe, come out on more of like a yearly basis. So this, I'm not 100% sure, but maybe look to another 6 months. But we do have right now, it's been widely reported that illegal crossings are down 94%. And then if you compare, like, for instance, the amount of fentanyl coming across that's being actually apprehended, it's at least a 70% decrease from the past year. And I think one thing I'll just think is really important to mention is that there have been no releases of illegal aliens into American communities in both May and June of 2025, which is just unprecedented. That's a massive victory, that Americans know that whoever's coming across the border, I mean, those numbers, like I mentioned, are just dramatically lower, but that they're not being released. And so we don't have to worry about, I mean, yes, there's the whole of worrying about people that have come over the border throughout the Biden years. And obviously there's mass deportations happening, but when you know that there's others that are coming over the border but are not being released, it's at least, I think, a huge testament to President Trump's agenda and to his mantra to the American people, which is promises made, promises kept.
Thankfully. And I was just wondering if we could talk a little bit about fentanyl, because it's really a substance that we do not have experience with in Europe. First of all, as far as I understand, it's a synthetic drug, right?
It is.
What would be the appeal of that in the U.S. when you already have natural opioids coming from the border with Latin America? Why would people prefer fentanyl?
So they don't prefer fentanyl.
Or?
It's not taken as like a drug that is like, I don't know, meth or cocaine. Like it's a more of like a bulking agent, and it's extremely strong. It's very extremely potent. Sorry. So that's when people take a drug, basically they overdose because they take a drug that they think is a certain drug with a certain amount and dosage, but it actually is laced with fentanyl, and that makes it way more potent, and it makes their dosage effectively much higher, and it's too much for their body to handle. So that's how they die from that. And it is cheaper, which is why the cartels lace it into other drugs.
I see.
It is.
So it's not a drug in itself. It just enhances other drugs.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And apart from ODing, are there other health consequences from fentanyl consumption?
I mean, I think that is the main health consequences, that you can overdose so easily without even knowing it.
Okay, I see. Well, I think Kristen, we won't take more of your time. Thank you
I
very
will
much.
put a final question, Miguel, if you can. So, Christian, I recognize that during the Biden administration, in addition to the negative effects you mentioned regarding mass immigration, there is also an issue of pressure of public service, such as healthcare, education, and especially housing prices in some cases. During the transition between the administrations, what has been the role of American First in the interests of Americans?
I don't understand the question.
So, although there's some negative impacts of mass immigration you mentioned, such
Mhm.
as like the crime and so on, there is also another one that is the pressure on public services,
Mhm.
healthcare, education, and housing prices in some cases.
Mhm.
How is the what is the role of American First as an institution in that cases? What is the concrete actions that you have made? It's just as an institute is to inform people, is to act with people directly in the ground. What is the main role of the institution in such cases?
Yeah, so America First Policy Institute was founded back in 2021 under the leadership of Brooke Rollins, who was President Trump's former domestic policy council advisor, and who is currently the USDA chief, so head of the U.S. Agriculture Department. And we wanted to continue the legacy of America First policies and keep researching and building out the America First agenda. But obviously, we're doing that under the or during the years of the Biden administration. But we knew that the American people widely supported these policies. We did a lot of polling. Over 80% of our agenda was supported by, or sorry, our agenda was supported by over 80% of people. And so that kind of touches on every policy. It's not just immigration. We have, like you mentioned, people that do healthcare, housing, all education, all these different policy areas to keep researching and writing and recommending. Especially, we did a lot of work with Congress, obviously, as well. On the immigration front, that was mostly the passage of HR2, which was the America First Border Security Bill in Congress. And so that was kind of the work that we did the past 4 years, and now we're pivoting to a lot more talking about ways that we can support the Trump administration's agenda with extra research analysis, work, engagement, etc.
Thank you, Christian.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Kristen, for your time
thank
again.
you.
It was an honor to host you, and I'm sure that we'll be able to collaborate with the FPI again in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.